The photograph was published on the student forum on a Wednesday afternoon, while the dormitory hallway was still filled with laughter after the day's last classes. In the picture, a girl from Canada sat, huddled on a closed toilet lid, clutching a plastic container with both hands, from which steam was rising. Inside was a modest meal, just boiled potatoes and a hard-boiled egg cut in half. Her face was hidden, as she had lowered her head low, long blonde hair covering almost her entire face, and her legs were neatly tucked under the hem of an old skirt. There was no expression, no gaze, just a moment of strange silence in a place that is not designed for eating at all. Right below the photo, the author left a caption. "Welcome toilet dining," a version of Total Economy from an international student from Canada. In just 2 hours, the post garnered hundreds of reposts and over 300 comments, mostly sarcastic and mocking. "Ew, how can you eat there? Is that tasty? Are international students really that pathetic? Surely she is afraid to spend money on food outside, poor thing, isn't she?" A few people timidly asked if this was true, but their voices were drowned out in a wave of cheap humor. No one knew the girl's name in the photo. No one bothered to find out why she was forced to eat in the toilet. For them it was just a weird picture, worthy of discussion. But in another corner of this educational institution, there was a person who was trembling, hugging a backpack, and barely opening her phone saw how she herself, scattered across the network, turned into a laughingstock. And what they all didn't know, it was the story behind this photograph that made the entire university freeze. Someone cried. Someone went out to apologize in front of hundreds of people. And there were those who, for the first time in many years of living in a civilized country, had to ask themselves how insensitive they had become. Sarah was born in a small settlement in the depths of the Yukon, northern Canada, where in winter the frost cracks so that the ground freezes through, and in spring the mud is such that it is impossible to walk. Her mother was a seamstress. Her father died when she had just started the first grade. Since childhood, Sarah lived in an old wooden cabin, nestled on the edge of the boreal forest. Around were only pines and snow. When the blizzard rose, the old walls trembled as if they wanted to fly away. On stuffy nights when they stoked the wood stove, Sarah and her mom could only lie quietly, listening to the howling wind and falling asleep, themselves not noticing how. Every morning, Sarah carried water from a well that was more than 100 meters from the house and only then went to school. On her back, the school backpack always gave way to 2 buckets on a yoke. Every time Mom asked, "Daughter, maybe skip school today. I need to deliver an order to clients in Whitehorse," Sarah just silently nodded. And the next morning she woke up even earlier, collected cold potatoes for the 2 of them herself, and managed to leave for school before Mom left the house. She never complained about hunger. Even when there were days when she ate only stale bread with salt, or when blizzards swept for a week and money for groceries ran out in the house, and Mom had to add grated carrots to the porridge to fill their stomachs. Sarah always came to school on time. Her white blouse might be old, but her notebooks were always neat and her handwriting even. Many teachers still remember how Sarah sat, back straight, left hand holding the book, right hand writing fast, but evenly, like a machine. The girl never made noise and never went to tutors. But every year the name of Sarah Thompson was always first on the list of the best students in the entire school. Once the homeroom teacher asked, "Do you have a dream?" Sarah was silent for a while and then said quietly in a voice barely audible, as if afraid to break what she was speaking about, "I want to study in the United States." Why? Because there people can live without fear that in winter the water in the house will freeze. This answer made the teacher smile, but then she suddenly fell silent. In the eyes of this child, the dream was simple. To live where there is central heating, where the roof does not leak from melting snow, where food does not need to be divided, cutting every egg in half. In high school, Sarah was still an outstanding student. Despite the lack of resources in the school where teachers were not enough for advanced classes, she herself took old books and studied via the internet on an old phone that Mom bought, saving on everything. Every night Sarah sat studying by the light of a desk lamp. Under her ear was the sound of the sewing machine and on the other side, her mother's cough. These sounds reminded her of time, of the years when there was no one to help. Classmates called Sarah a nerd. Someone even blurted out, "Why do you study like that? You will still end up sewing like your mother." But Sarah did not pay attention. She knew only one thing. If she did not study, she would stay here forever, with this well, wood stove and frosts down to -40. And so in the graduating class she found a full scholarship program for poor students overcoming difficulties at a community college in California, USA. Condition: excellent academic performance 3 years in a row, fluency in spoken English, recommendation letter from school. Sarah silently prepared. Every evening after lessons she looked after the neighbors' children and simultaneously trained her perception of academic English on an old radio. Her mom took laundry home for a whole month to raise money for the registration for the SAT exam. The exam results stunned the whole school. Sarah got a near-perfect score. Such a score was almost unseen in this northern district. And so one morning in October, the official letter with the invitation to study came to Sarah Thompson. Full scholarship majoring in psychology at Los Rios College, California, USA. The homeroom teacher cried. Mom didn't understand everything written in the letter, only looked at the word congratulations and silently hugged her daughter. In this embrace was the whole life in poverty, as if rolled into a knot, and Sarah, the small girl grown up under the sound of a sewing machine, in the cold of northern winters and on lunches of potatoes, took a step out of this closed circle of poverty. But America was not paradise, and the scholarship did not mean the dream would be easy. Sarah stepped onto American soil in one of the last days of summer. The airport in Sacramento was flooded with sun, but it was a dry and transparent sun, not smelling of thawing earth like at her home. Everything was new, from the stream of people silently pulling suitcases through customs to the signs sparkling with LED lights, which she tried to read very carefully so as not to get lost. She knew no one here. The meeting from the college consisted only of an email with instructions, a couple of electronic forms, and a small map with the route to the dormitory for international students. When the bus got to the final stop, it was already almost dark. The streets were quiet. Wooden houses flashed behind trees with yellowing leaves. Sarah dragged her suitcase across the unfamiliar street. Hands trembled when she typed the code on the door of the building with the inscription, International Student Housing. Inside it smelled of unfamiliar food. Loud laughter was heard. 4 roommates, a girl from Korea, 2 students from Mexico and a white girl from Georgia, already gathered earlier. No one particularly paid attention to the small new girl. Someone asked her name but did not hear the pronunciation. Someone looked at Sarah's torn backpack and faded suitcase and then shrugged. "First time overseas?" She nodded, and everyone turned away. The room was an area of only about 20 square meters, but 5 people lived in it. Bunk beds stood close to the walls. The common use place was an old wooden table and a mini electric stove, which could be used only once per evening. The toilet was shared. There was no separate bathroom. On the first night Sarah could not sleep. She lay, turned on her side and looked at the ceiling. She heard EDM music from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner of the room and then fell into sleep, herself not noticing how, only to wake up at 3 a.m. because a neighbor opened the fridge in search of food. The first class shocked her. The professor spoke fast, used slang, questions poured one after another. Sarah caught half, understood a third, the rest was fog. Every time someone asked, "What do you think, Sarah?" she only strained a smile, said, "Sorry, can you repeat?" and lowered her eyes. Her answers were uncertain, pronunciation indistinct, which made some local students giggle. She did not know accidentally or intentionally, simply felt how her heart shrank every time after classes. But the worst was not the study, but the prices for food. The cheapest portion in the cafeteria cost more than $6. A simple cup of coffee, almost $3. Milk, bread, vegetables, everything was 3 to 4 times more expensive than at home due to the currency exchange. The scholarship covered only tuition and most of the housing costs. The remainder was enough for almost nothing. Sarah began to record every expense in a small notebook. $1 for soap, $3 for noodles, $5 for eggs. She went to the internet to learn how to cook simple dishes from eggs and cabbage. She bought potatoes at a cheap grocery store which was more than 2 miles from campus. Every trip there was like a migration of nations with 3 heavy bags. She did not buy bottled water, used old bottles collecting water from the tap, did not eat in the cafeteria, did not participate in parties. Every lunch was a neat container with a boiled egg, stewed cabbage, sometimes with a piece of fried tofu. From the very beginning, she always hid the container in her backpack, ate only when no one saw. On the back bench behind the library or in the corner of the stairs where few people walked. One day it rained. Sarah did not find a secluded place and was forced to hug the container with food, sitting in the women's toilet, avoiding glances and keeping the last remnants of privacy. Not because she was ashamed of poverty. She simply did not want to be pitied, did not want anyone to see her simple food and ask why she does not eat in the cafeteria. Because she knew if she says the real reason, people will think that she is complaining about life. She did not want to be called overly economical, and even more so did not want them to hang the label of a miserable international student on her, like in the articles that she read. Self-respect was the only thing she kept intact in this foreign place. On the 2nd month in America, Sarah began to work part-time. Her scholarship covered only study, but not living. She thought that if she spent very economically, just ate less and wore old clothes, it would be enough. But America is not the Canadian hinterland. Just washing clothes in the machine cost almost $4 a week. A month later, after deducting the payment for the room, Sarah had exactly $28 left on the account. She began to wash dishes in a diner on the outskirts. The work lasted from 6 p.m. to almost midnight, 6 days a week. There was no official contract. The owner paid cash, $9 an hour. To get to work, Sarah had to walk almost 20 minutes to the bus stop, wait another 30 minutes for the last bus to the dormitory. On days when the trip was delayed, she had to walk more than 4 miles in the night cold, wrapping her neck tightly with a scarf and hiding her hands in thin pockets of the jacket, lowering her head and calming herself on the go. It's okay. Just a little more to endure. During the day, she came to classes with dark circles under her eyes. Sometimes the body ached so that she could not sit in the auditorium. But when someone asked, "Are you okay?" she still smiled easily and nodded. "I'm fine." No one knew what time she returned last night. No one paid attention to the jacket she wore for 3 weeks without washing or the boots with worn fabric on the heels. In that Christmas, while all roommates went away, Sarah remained on campus. She tried to take extra shifts at the restaurant. The owner awkwardly said, "Sarah, it's a holiday. You don't rest." She only shook her head. "No, I want to work a little more." She used the money earned at the end of the year to send home not much, about $120. But it was enough for Mom to buy medicine and the first warm coat in almost 5 years, without new things. There were nights when, after washing dozens of pans with black burnt bottoms, with hands red from hot water, Sarah quietly sat on the steps of the black entrance of the restaurant, holding a container with a cold lunch. Inside were pickles, which Mom passed with an occasion. She ate slowly, piece by piece, as if trying to hold the image of the native home bit by bit, in the heart of a foreign land. The phone beeped with a message from Mom. "Daughter, frosts are strong here. Dress warmer. I'm already better." The cough passed. Study calmly. But Sarah did not answer immediately. She raised her face to the sky, took a deep breath. Above was the black sky, not a single star. An American city, modern, full of lights, but it was a place where she never felt so lonely. At home, when it was hard, she had Mom, and here no one called her by name. No one understood how she strains to survive. More than once she asked herself, did she make a mistake leaving so far? But the next morning she still came to class on time, still fully recorded lectures, still wrote emails to professors with a request to read materials in advance at home because her English is still weak and she wants to prepare better. She was not a genius, she was simply more stubborn than others. She was not rich, but never asked for pity. And among everything she sacrificed for survival, the only thing she did not agree to lose is the sense of own dignity. Friday, the university was emptier than usual. Some classes ended earlier. Students poured into the yard, chatted, ate, prepared for the weekend. Sarah just came out of the lecture holding a small container wrapped in a thin scarf in her hand, quickly making her way away from the academic building to find a corner for lunch. On that day it rained lightly. Benches in the yard got wet. The library closed earlier for electricity maintenance. All familiar corners where Sarah usually hid to eat were occupied or inaccessible. She hesitated for almost 10 minutes under the visor of the women's toilet. Hands froze, food began to cool. In the end, she entered the toilet on the 3rd floor, in the most rarely visited zone since it was far from the auditoriums. She chose the last stall, clean and quiet, carefully laid paper on the closed toilet lid, and sat down. It was 12:07 p.m. She opened the container, a portion of boiled potatoes, a boiled egg, cut in half, a little salted cabbage and a piece of black bread remaining from yesterday. No fork. She ate with a plastic spoon, slowly, carefully, as if afraid to disturb someone behind the walls. Suddenly in the neighboring stall a light noise rang out, then hurried steps were heard. Sarah shuddered a little but did not attach importance. She continued to eat the last piece, lowering her head. About 3 minutes later she removed the container, wrapped it in a scarf, removed to the backpack, washed her hands in the sink and left. The cold wind hit in the corridor when she went out. Sarah shivered, wrapping the old sweater tighter. A few hours later a post appeared in the closed group for students of the college. The photo was taken at a slight angle, clear and full. A girl from Canada, huddled in a toilet stall, holding a container with food, eyes lowered, light dim, but the image is clear to the smallest details. The container, disheveled hair, dark skirt and tightly shifted legs. The caption attached to the photo was like a slap. They say international students are very diligent. Now I see that so much so that they eat in the toilet. And hashtags, #toilet dining, #Canadian style. The post instantly attracted attention. The number of interactions grew geometrically. Someone put haha, someone tagged friends. Comments were very different. Poor thing, but this is somehow weird. Oh God, is she really that hungry? I don't know whether she is lazy to communicate or afraid to spend money. Someone recognized the toilet on the 3rd floor. Someone suspected the identity of the girl, but the majority did not care truly. They just looked at it as entertainment in the middle of a boring day. Sarah knew nothing until the evening, while after the shift when she rode the bus to the dormitory, the taciturn Korean neighbor unexpectedly handed her the phone. "Hey, this is you, right?" She looked at the screen and stiffened, hands trembled, in the head became empty. She looked at herself. The face is half hidden, the pose is compressed, like a child who was caught for something bad. When she returned to the room she said nothing, removed the backpack, climbed onto the bed and turned away to the wall. The neighbor quietly said, "If it were me, I would die of shame." Sarah did not answer, but inside something broke, quietly like the sound of a shard fallen on the floor, not too loud, but cut on the heart. This was the first time she cried since she stepped on American land. Not from hunger, not from fatigue, but because they took away from her what she cherished all the way from home to the foreign land. Polite silence. Saturday morning the library again began to fill. Groups of students gathered around tables. Someone knocked on the keyboard. Someone laughed. The knock of coffee cups on the table sounded like the rhythm of life in which there were no incidents. But Sarah was different. She entered like a shadow, quietly and slowly, eyes lowered, back slightly hunched. She looked at no one but knew that they looked at her. Not because she was bright, but because today the whole college knew about the photo. The screenshot of the post from the closed group spread everywhere, from college groups to communities of Asian and Canadian students, and even larger publics for foreigners. The author of the original photo did not delete the post and did not refute it. He only quietly changed the account name to an anonymous nickname and disappeared. But the pain remained, untouched, like a wound that did not have time to heal, but was scratched again. Sarah understood this by quick glances, by whispers behind the back, by eyes half sympathetic, half contemptuous every time she passed along the corridor. It is exactly her. Yesterday I saw this photo. How can one eat in the toilet? Oh my God. In the class no one sat next to her anymore. The chair next was always empty. The professor did not mention the incident, but his look turned to Sarah, clearly softened as if he pitied her. Sarah hated this more than ridicule. She did not want to be pitied. She wanted to be treated as before, normally, so that she was invisible like everyone else. On that day in the lunch break, she did not go out and did not bring food. She sat motionless on a chair in an empty class, looking at the clock. How minute after minute leaves, the stomach cramped with spasms, but she reconciled. It is better than when they look at you. Point a finger, examine what she eats today and where. In the evening, the neighbor called to eat somewhere. Sarah shook her head, said, "I'm tired." The neighbor sighed. "You are tired all the time. How can one live like that? I saw the photo, but you must explain something." Sarah only smiled weakly. Explain to whom and why? Do those who laughed at her, who reposted her photo, really want to know the truth, or do they just need a name, a face, to turn into a joke, discuss and throw away? In that night, she did not sleep almost until the morning. The phone screen lit up and went out dozens of times. She was going to write a post, say that she is not weird at all, that food in the toilet is a forced measure because there was no other place, that she did not want anyone to see her humble lunch, but in the end her fingers slipped from the keyboard. Not because she was afraid, but because in the world where people do not need to understand to have the right to judge, words sometimes do not have weight. The next day, Sarah came to study earlier than usual, but barely entering the class, saw a sheet of paper glued to the table on which with a black marker was crookedly written, "Toilet tasting." But she stood silently for several seconds, then unglued the paper, crumpled and put in the pocket, not saying a word and not crying. She just got the phone, opened contacts, pressed on Mom's name but did not call. She knew that if she hears Mom's voice now, she will cry, and she did not want Mom to worry. At home, Mom still had to buy medicine every week. One call with a trembling voice would make her not sleep all night from anxiety, therefore Sarah silently sat down and opened the notebook. Although in ears it was still ringing. This is that very girl from the toilet. Pity her or scary? She no longer saw the difference. All this pushed her away from what she so tried to save, the right to normal life. Sarah gradually disappeared. No one saw her in the library anymore, did not see how she dines in the corner of the stairs or in the backyard. The schedule remained the same, grades good, but she became like an invisible shadow passing through the class, came early, sat behind, did not perform, did not communicate. Professors still called her name at the roll call, classmates still briskly greeted each other, excluding only her. She stood outside all this. No one said anything directly, but the silence was denser than any accusations. In the dormitory, laughter suddenly subsided when she entered the room. The Korean began to spend the night at her boyfriend more often. Two Mexicans turned on loud music, knowing that she learns lessons, and the American girl, the one that lent Sarah charging on the first day, now also silently avoided meeting. No one asked her about the photo. No one apologized, but their glances were enough. Sarah began to eat less. Many days did not eat at all. Containers with home food now cooled not only because of the weather, but also because she no longer wanted to open them. In the head hundreds of times sounded the phrase from that post, "So diligent that eats in the toilet." The author possibly thought that this is simply a joke, a trifling story for entertainment in a boring afternoon. But for Sarah it was like a blunt knife, not sharp enough to end with everything at once, but every day little by little shredding her dignity. Once, returning late from work, she fell right at the door of the room from dizziness, trembling and darkening in the eyes, but still did not want to call an ambulance because there was no money. In that night she dreamed that she sits in the middle of the class, hands do not move, mouth cannot make a sound, and everyone around only look at her and turn away. The next morning she wrote an email to the Department for Work with International Students. The content was brief. "I want to take an academic leave for 1 semester. Reason: state of health and financial difficulties." Having written, she did not press send, but the very fact of typing every word made her cry. Not from fatigue, but from disappointment. Disappointment in herself that possibly people are right. She does not fit for this place. She is alien, rural, tried to seem normal, but still was exposed and rejected. On that day after lunch, she came to classes as usual. But when the professor asked, "Sarah, can you share your opinion?" she only shook her head. "Sorry, I have nothing to say." A classmate from the Philippines turned to her and uncertainly asked, "Are you okay?" She answered quietly, almost soundlessly, "I'm fine," and again lowered her head as always. That evening she again sat alone by the window on the third floor of the dormitory. Cold wind burst in. Below, a group of students arranged a night picnic. Garlands flickered, quiet music played. It smelled deliciously of food. She looked down for some time, then got up and closed the window. In the dark, Sarah got the last container from the fridge. It stood there already 3 days. Frost formed on the edges. Opened. The smell was sourish. She did not eat, just closed the lid, neatly put in a package, went out into the corridor and silently went down the stairs, not knowing where to go, knowing only that she cannot stay in the room anymore. And in her soul flashed a thought, flashed and went out like a bulb at the end of the corridor. Maybe I should give up. Professor Jordan was the teacher responsible for Introduction to Psychology. A man over 50, with gray hair and a face on which there was always an expression of deep thoughtfulness. In classes, he spoke little but very attentively observed every student. In the list of almost 30 names, he remembered who was late with the delivery of works, who asked for leave for personal reasons, who tried, despite the trembling pronunciation. And he very well remembered Sarah because from the very first classes, this Canadian girl always sat with a straight back, followed the lecture with eyes, not ceasing to record, performed rarely, but her works were always impeccable, and answers clear. He asked himself, does this girl really plan to engage in psychology or studies only for the sake of changing her life? But in the last 3 weeks, he saw how she changed. She still attended, still wrote, but in eyes there was no longer concentration. Under them lay dark circles. Reaction slowed down. Every time when he called her, Sarah only shook her head, asking not to answer. Once she asked to go out in the middle of the pair, referring to a headache, but her face spoke that she hides something much bigger. On that day after classes, he intentionally detained her. "Sarah, can you stay for a couple of minutes?" She slightly froze, firmly clutching the backpack strap, lowered her head. "Yes, Professor, did something happen? I just see that lately you are lagging behind a little. Do you have any difficulties? If necessary, you can tell me." Sarah was silent, then weakly smiled. "I'm fine. I'm just a little tired." Professor Jordan nodded, did not press, but he looked at her more attentively, noticed reddened eyes and hands, compressed too much to keep calmness. This was not a sign of a student who is simply tired. That evening he opened the internal forum of the college, entered the keywords "Toilet Dining Canada Girl Photo Incident" and found it. The photograph. Although the account of the author was anonymous, the content remained, spreading through dozens of reposts and scattered comments in different groups. He looked at the photo for several minutes, not from curiosity, but from anger, not at the one who filmed, but at himself. Because he, a teacher, a person who could see, too long ignored this quiet signal about help. The next day he called the department for work with international students, demanding a personal meeting with Sarah as an academic consultant and for psychological support. At first, the employees of the department were in confusion. She reported nothing, never applied for help. Professor Jordan quietly said, "That is exactly why I must do this," until everything went too far. The meeting was appointed for Monday morning. Sarah was called to the office of the faculty, where students rarely entered without a special reason. She sat opposite Professor Jordan. In the office it was light and quiet. He began with a very soft phrase. "I do not care where this photo came from or who did it. I just want to know if you are okay." Sarah bit her lip and did not answer. "If you need help in anything, from study to psychology or finances, in the college there are procedures. There are people who will listen. You need only to say." For the first time in many weeks, Sarah raised her head. Her eyes reddened, but she tried to keep the voice firm. "Professor, is it true that I am not guilty? Is it true that I did nothing wrong?" Professor Jordan answered not immediately. He got from the table drawer a small book to give her and pointed to the line printed in italics. "Do not let the world make you feel guilt for that you are trying to live dignifiedly." Sarah took the book. Hands still trembled, but the look softened a little. That conversation lasted almost an hour. There were no immediate decisions, no promises. But the most important was that Sarah for the first time spoke from a pure heart, and from this moment the smoldering fire which was almost extinguished in her began to flare up again. 2 days after the first meeting, Sarah herself sent an email to Professor Jordan. In the subject of the letter was only a short, "I want to explain everything." In the letter she asked for a new meeting, at this time not to answer questions, but to tell that in what she did not dare to confess to anyone from the moment of arrival in America. The meeting took place in a small office behind the library, where students rarely entered. Professor Jordan sat her at the window, where the morning sun shone, enough to create a feeling of lightness. He did not take with him neither documents nor pen nor paper. There was only his presence, patience, and absence of condemnation. Sarah sat silently for several minutes, putting a hand on the small book that he gave last time, and then she began to tell. She told about the small settlement, full of cold, where she comes from, where Yukon frosts freeze everything in winter, where her mom sewed clothes from morning to night only so that there was enough money for textbooks for the daughter. She told about the scholarship, about the incredible joy when the letter about enrollment came. But then she realized that the full scholarship does not cover expenses for life. She told about the first days in America, about the tight dormitory for 5, about lunches which had to be hidden because of shame, about fatigue when she studied, washed dishes, and cared about sending money to Mom, who lay in the hospital with chronic bronchitis. She did not cry but firmly compressed hands. The voice interrupted. "I was not going to eat in the toilet. I did not want this, but on that day it rained, benches got wet, the library closed. I did not want to eat before others, because my lunch was too poor. I did not want someone to see and pity me. I just wanted a quiet corner, only and everything." Professor Jordan silently listened to every word, not interrupting, not interfering. Sarah continued. "I do not know who took a photo. But when I saw that my photo spreads as a joke, I as if died partially. I began to think, maybe I am wrong, maybe I should not have come here, maybe I am unworthy." Hearing this, Professor Jordan sighed. He stood up, poured a glass of water, and put before her. "You are not guilty. Girl, you were never guilty. Guilty is how people look at the moment of poverty, forgetting about the whole way standing behind it." He kept silent a little, then continued slowly as if lighting something in her soul. "In this country we teach about equality, about human rights, about kindness, but many of us forgot about the most important, ability to listen." Sarah lowered her head, but at this time not from shame but from relief. She spoke out, and over her did not laugh. She was not despised, from her did not turn away, was only a person who listened completely, sincerely, and this was for her salvation. At the end of the meeting, Professor Jordan quietly asked, "Sarah, if you agree, I want to tell this story, without names, without photos, just a story, so that others understand that they see incorrectly." Sarah raised eyes. They were still wet, but the look became firmer. "If this helps someone like me not to suffer anymore, then I agree." That evening, after the conversation with Sarah, Professor Jordan returned to his office and worked in silence. He sat before an empty screen, putting hands on the keyboard, but could not type a word more than 10 minutes. In his head still sounded the voice of Sarah, not loud, not plaintive, but sharp, like a needle. The girl who passed through all childhood with stale bread and kerosene lamp, who crossed the continent to save the sense of own dignity, and all the same was crushed by only one photo and cheap jokes. He began to write not a report and not a petition, but simply a letter for internal distribution to all teachers of the faculty and in the department for work with students. In the letter he told about an international student from Canada, not naming the name, who was forced to eat in the toilet because of extremely difficult circumstances, because of shame, not daring to show anyone her modest lunch. He described the invisible isolation which the girl had to survive after the distribution of the photo. And he finished the letter with a question that made many readers stop for a long time. We always teach students empathy, but how long ago did we ourselves stop hearing those children who silently suffer? In just 24 hours, answers poured one after another. One teacher wrote, "I saw this photo but did not understand the story behind it." Someone said, "I am ashamed that I also laughed." Might another teacher, also a former international student, wrote, "I was that child, not in the toilet, but in the soul it was just as lonely and hopeless." The deputy dean, Mrs. Simons, called Professor Jordan personally. "How do you look at that? We organized an open meeting, not naming names, not criticizing personalities, but a meeting so that the whole college looked at itself from the side." Professor Jordan thought, "Only if we do not turn this into a session of consolation, but make a place for honesty." The internal meeting took place on that Thursday afternoon. Attended almost 20 teachers, curators, and heads of support services. On the screen, Professor Jordan again presented the story. With words, without pictures, without names, without criticism, only facts. He told about the girl who worked to exhaustion, who walked on foot 4 miles after the night shift to save money, about the cold-boiled lunch in a plastic container, about lowered eyes every time when someone asked, "Are you okay?" And at the end he said, "She does not need anyone's pity. She needed only a worthy place to dine, a place without ridicule, a look without prejudice. We can give her this, late, but it never happens too late." In the room stood dead silence. Everyone was silent for a long time. Finally, Mrs. Simons nodded. "Next week we will hold a general meeting of the college. Visiting for students is not mandatory, but let them decide themselves on whose side they want to be." When the meeting ended, a young teacher came to Professor Jordan, put a hand on his shoulder and quietly said, "You know, when I was a student, I also ate behind the door of the library, because I was afraid that others will laugh at the food that I brought from home." When Professor Jordan slightly smiled. Possibly now is the time to return to such children as she the right to raise the head. The large hall of Los Rios College was never so full as on that Tuesday afternoon. More than 300 students, teachers, and employees of the college attended. Some from curiosity, some by invitation, and the rest came because they wanted to know, is that story truthful in the end? On the stage there were no colored lights, there were no cameras, there was no background music. As at solemn ceremonies of graduation, only a wooden tribune, a microphone, and rows of armchairs turned forward. First spoke Mrs. Simons, Deputy Dean. She spoke briefly and slowly. "We gathered here not to criticize someone. We came to hear the story which we should have heard long ago." Then she invited Professor Jordan. He stood in the middle of the stage, holding in hand a folded sheet of paper, but did not look into it. He told the story from the very beginning. Without names, without photos, not revealing the identity, but every word as if tore from that photograph the poisonous humor, returning to it its true essence. A quiet moment of sense of own dignity. He told about the girl who worked to exhaustion, ate cold food in an empty corner because she did not want pity, who broke when exactly her silence turned into entertainment. He told, not raising the voice, not shedding tears, but every word sounded in the hall, penetrating into the deepest layers of consciousness of sitting there people. A local student sitting at the first row suddenly bent, covering the face with hands. The neighbor heard a very quiet sigh. In the middle rows, a student of sociology, who liked the original post, closed eyes for a long time. And when he reached the moment, she needed only a place to eat. Not a toilet, not a stairs, just a chair, a table surface where there is no condemnation. And we, with all our amenities and civilization, did not give her this. Hung silence, so deep that one could hear the noise of the wind from ventilation above. No one applauded, no one coughed, was only silence, heavy so much that people wanted to cry. Professor Jordan looked at the lower rows and said the last phrase, "If she is here today, I hope she knows that she is not alone and that she deserves much more." No one knew that Sarah sits at the end of the hall, quietly pulling the hat, tightly buttoning the jacket. But hearing this, she compressed hands into fists, tightly compressed lips. And for the first time in many weeks, her tears flowed not from resentment, but from that she thought that never will receive, recognition. And suddenly, unexpectedly, one student came out to the tribune. It was Andrew, a sophomore of the technological faculty, that same who first left a mocking comment under the photo. He took the microphone. Eyes at him were red. "I do not know who this girl is, but I know that I participated in that to cause someone pain, not realizing this. And I ask for forgiveness." No one clapped, But someone stood up, then the second, then the teacher, then the whole left row, not to welcome but to stand on the side of truth. After Andrew left the Tribune, the hall was still immersed in a strange silence, not awkward and not cold. It was the silence of people who for the first time felt that accidentally made a mistake and for the first time sincerely wanted to correct this. Raised one hand and from the back rows rang out a voice, quiet but clear. "Can I say a couple of words?" The whole hall turned back. Sarah stood there. The hat was removed, the jacket unbuttoned. The figure small, thin, but the look was completely different than in those times when she lowered the face in the class. Mrs. Simons nodded. "I ask you." Sarah slowly went to the stage. Every her step was resistance to fear to be seen. But unlike past times, now there were no contemptuous looks, no one grinned. There were only attentive eyes, listening and waiting. She stood before the microphone, kept silent a little and began. "I am that very girl in the photo." No one dared to breathe loudly. Those who did not know shuddered. Those who guessed lowered heads. I felt shame. I wanted to disappear because I thought that poverty is that what needs to be hidden. I did not want someone to see how I eat in the toilet because I did not want to be pitied or laughed. Her voice slightly trembled, but she continued. I ate there because there was no other place. I did not have enough money for the canteen. I did not dare to sit in the library because in my container were only a boiled egg and potatoes. I did not want someone to see and ask, "You eat only this?" I did not want someone to see my need. She made a pause, deeply inhaled. But today I understood that poverty is not shameful. To save dignity in poverty, here is what is the most difficult. And if I do not stand up now, then to such as me will have to hide many more times. The teacher got a handkerchief. A student wiped tears. Sarah said the last phrase already without trembling. I do not need anyone's pity. I just want to live like everyone. Eat lunch, not being afraid that I will be photographed stealthily, go to study, not hiding poverty. And I believe that today here everyone began to understand this. A second, two, and the whole hall stood up. Without noise, without screams, were only applause, even, slow, but steady. Palms hit each other not for ovation, but for apology. And for the first time Sarah raised her head, straightened her back, not avoiding, not running away. She smiled, a light smile as if finally the load of many years slipped from her shoulders. We often see photos in the network, laugh and scroll, but few stop to ask what life the person in the photo lives. Sarah was considered strange, the girl who eats in the toilet. But no one knew that behind the moment it would seem worthy of laughter stand thousands of days of silent overcoming of difficulties, night hikes on foot for 4 miles to the dormitory, hands swollen from washing pans, anxious sleep under the sound of a sewing machine in memories of poverty. Sarah did not need pity of others. She needed only a chair, a table where one can eat like everyone else, and possibly most of all she needed a look without prejudice. Her story is not a reproach, but a reminder. Somewhere near us there are people who live quietly, dignifiedly, steadfastly, but they lack only one chance to be understood. Do not let their silence turn into a joke. Do not let dignity be washed into the toilet. And if one day you see someone with a lowered head, remember that he is not necessarily broken. Possibly he just tries to save the last grains of dignity in the world, which too hurries to show participation.